Barbados is leading the charge for small island developing states in pushing for an urgent agreement regarding ongoing negotiations on climate change and its impact on SIDS. This from Prime Minister Frundle Stewart as Barbados hosted regional and international delegates in Independence Square in a ceremony to launch celebrations for World Environment Day under the theme SIDS and Climate Change, Raise Your Voice, Not the Sea Level. Prime Minister Stewart hopes a number of vexing issues will be resolved at a meeting of the United Nations Framework on Climate Change slated for Peru later this year.
Barbados wishes to underscore the need for an early agreement on the various unresolved issues in the climate change negotiations, including support for undertaking urgent adaptation action on the ground in SIDS. Adequate financing, in particular the finalization of the architecture and operationalization of the Green Climate Fund, and conclusion of the discussion on loss and damage.
The Prime Minister has also called for the development of a SIDS intergovernmental institution, which he says has become critical.
The development of a SIDS intergovernmental institution must be one of the critical outputs of the Third International Conference on SIDS. Without such a mechanism, it is likely that most of the practical and pragmatic actions perceived by the various United Nations General Assembly resolutions will go unimplemented. Closely linked to this is the repeated call by SIDS worldwide for a coherent structural response on the part of the UN system to SIDS issues.
And Environment Minister Dr. Dennis Lowe is reporting success regarding two major projects aimed at protecting Barbados coastlines from the effects of climate change. This as he gave an update to local, regional and international delegates gathered for that launch of World Environment Day at Independence Square.
One, the 2002 Coastal Infrastructure Project, which is now completed, and two, the 2011 Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Project, which are being hailed as international best practices for small island developing states. Ladies and gentlemen, those Inter-American Development Bank supported interventions are both under the Coastal Zone Management Unit of my ministry and seek to preserve and manage Barbados's coastline. Our coasts are critical economic assets and must be protected from risks associated with climate change.
And we're also hearing that local officials will be the first to see a new report to be released here in Barbados by the United Nations Environmental Programme. News of this from UNEP's Executive Director Achim Steiner. He says the articles, dubbed the SIDS Foresight Report, outlines the 20 emerging issues at the center of the priorities of small island developing states. Mr. Steiner says it's a major step in giving voice to the reality, leadership and answers being sought by SIDS today.
This report will also accompany the release of the Barbados Green Economy Scoping Study, which is, interesting enough, almost falling behind the reality of implementation, which is not very often in the world. There are still reports being written and completed that we began together 2, 3, 4 years ago, parts of which you're already implementing while you're still completing the overall strategy because the opportunities are so clear. And the leadership that you have been able to provide have inspired so many that things are beginning to happen even before a report is finally completed.
Moodys' triple-notch downgrade is geared at forcing a devaluation of the Barbados dollar. That's the assessment of Senior Fellow in Political Science, International Political Economy at the University of the West Indies, Dr. Don Marshall. He believes the criteria used to gauge the Barbadian economy for a downgrade is flawed.
The reality is that they are looking at a set of indicators, and these indicators are made for woeful reading, admittedly, but then they reach for what they call interpretive excess, then to come up with conclusions when they will pursue such a triple notch downgrade. I think the pace at which they expect Barbados government to respond to the reforms is unreasonable.
Well, in the wake of the recent downgrade by Moodys, a government minister says investor interest in Barbados remains high. Minister of Industry, International Business, Commerce and Small Business Development, Donald Innes, says his trip to Canada over the last 2 weeks bears out the point.
As a matter of fact, most of the law firms and accounting firms that I would have met with have experience in dealing with Barbados, and they also have clients who are very keen to make Barbados part of their global structure. Reports coming out of Canada recently confirms that Barbados continues to be the third largest recipient of foreign direct investment out of Canada. I think we have now gone past 60 billion Canadian dollars in investment through Barbados, and that is certainly up from $56 billion just a few years ago.
Well, Minister Indes says he has taken note of the Moodys report, but is also well aware that government has outlined a program to stem this country's economic slide and put it on a sustainable path.
The government's revenues have not been as high as we would all have liked, and our efforts at expenditure cuts, while it's going in the right direction, may not have been going at the pace that some of these rating agencies and lending agencies would like. But we are very mindful that this is an economy and a society we are dealing with. And there are those who would like us to quicken the pace and perhaps don't appreciate the kind of social dislocation that could occur in this society. So we have to do things in a very measured manner.
A team from the International Monetary Fund is expected to meet with top officials of the Ministry of Finance for talks on the state of the economy. The talks come just days after Moodys downgraded Barbados' credit rating by 3 notches. Yesterday, the group met with officials of the Central Bank of Barbados, local bankers and officials of the private sector. Earlier this year, Finance Minister Chris Sinclair told Parliament that government had asked the IMF for technical assistance, which would require an examination of the island's customs, taxation and statutory boards. The IMF mission to Barbados is being headed by its Deputy Division Chief for the Western Hemisphere. The talks follow recent Article 4 consultations between the IMF and the government. Well, close to 200 workers from the National Conservation Commission who have been retrenched by government as part of its measures to reduce costs will have their cases heard by the Employment Rights Tribunal tomorrow. That body will be meeting at the Labour Department's Warren's office at 2 o'clock. The development comes nearly 2 weeks after the matter was referred to mediation by Prime Minister Frundle Stewart at government headquarters. Well, following those talks with the Prime Minister and the unions, he said he would be referring the matter to the Employment Rights Tribunal. He also told reporters that an end to the NCC dispute was in sight, with the tribunal expected to bring an urgent settlement to the matter. Correcting the mistakes made in the retrenchment process, Mr. Stewart says there could be a number of outcomes. One, that some people could be returning to their jobs while others are sent home. He also contends that the NCC has an obligation to stick to the close to 200 workers to be retrenched. But Mr. Stewart says that once the tribunal makes a ruling, it can only be appealed on points of law. Three Barbadian fishermen were rescued at sea about 14 nautical miles to the east of St. Lucia this morning after their vessel encountered engine trouble. The captain, Henderson Mears, reported that they'd spent 3 days fishing and were about to head home when the electrical system on the vessel shut down. The men encountered 2 St. Lucian vessels and used mobile telephones belonging to the local fishermen to make a distress call. The 2 St. Lucian vessels then towed the stricken boat to shore, but because of the size of the Barbadian vessel, Kira Lee, which is 33 feet long, the vessel encountered difficulty and the Marine Police were alerted. The boat with Captain Mears and his men was towed to the Marine Police base in VG, where the men are staying until their vessel is repaired. They did not require medical treatment. Barbadians need not worry, as the island has surveillance in place and is monitoring the outbreak of the MERS virus. The Middle East Respiratory Syndrome is a viral respiratory illness first reported in Saudi Arabia in 2012. It has killed 190 people in Saudi Arabia, and cases have been found in other countries in the Middle East, Europe, Asia, and also in the United States. Well, so far, evidence points to camels as a possible source for MERS infection. Senior Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Karen Springer, is telling Barbadians that symptoms of MERS vary.
Patients may present with fever, cough. Some patients actually develop severe pneumonia, and others have complications such as kidney failure.
Well, as it relates to dengue fever, some 90 cases have been detected to date. Environmental and health officials expect that figure will this year be a bit lower. Chief Environmental Health Officer Tyrone Applewhite says efforts continue to combat the spread of dengue.
We continue to do our inspection in those high-risk areas. We mentioned we have all of those areas mapped on our GPS system, and those are constantly being monitored and reported on. We have fogging, very strategically targeting those particular areas as well. We continue to work very, very nicely with the utility companies relative to the underground junction boxes. That is a relatively successful program that we have, and I think I want to give kudos to one of those companies for the hard work that they are putting in reducing the number of mosquitoes around.
One educator is singing the praises of the island's education system. Director of the School of Education at the University of the West Indies, Dr. Jennifer Obadiah, notes that close to 100% of children are exposed to some form of education early. Dr. Obadiah was speaking to the media after a tour of the Barbados nursery facilities at Roebuck Street. However, she's concerned at the fallout which occurs in the secondary schools.
Perhaps we falter along the way, that we don't quite see the benefits when we hit secondary school. And so that needs to be investigated, and those are some of the studies that we hope to do. But we started here at Barbados, where we're here at the Sunshine Early Stimulation Program.